Hello, everybody. Welcome to Out of the Office. This is a podcast exploring the lessons learned from the hit TV show, The US Office, and it's all about how we can create a more diverse and inclusive workplace. Now, I'm Sarah Chandran. I'm the founder of Fresh and Fearless, and I'll be hosting all of these episodes from Out of the Office, and we'll delve into the world of Dunder Mifflin and examine the different characters and the scenarios presented throughout the series. Now, we're going to analyze how the show highlight the ways that we can not run an office and how we can actually use that as a learning to respect diversity, foster inclusion, and create a more positive workplace environment. So whether you're a fan of The Office or just interested in learning more about creating a more inclusive workplace, this podcast is for you. So grab your favorite Dundee award and tune in to Out of the Office. So my very first guest for the show is Sharn, who I'll welcome up on the stage now. Sharn, would you like to just introduce yourself for our listeners?
Thanks, Sarah. Hello, I'm Sharn. I am head of people for a tech startup and really excited to be here because talking about two of the things I love, which is the workplace. I know that sounds cheesy, but when you love what you do, that's nice and easy. And the office, but more specifically, the US office, which controversial, I think is better than the UK.
It is elite. It is elite in comparison to the UK office, I have to agree. I remember talking to Sharn about my idea for starting this podcast, and you genuinely squealed. Like the noise that came out of your mouth was hilarious because you're like, oh my God, I love The Office. Please let me be on the show. And I was like, I mean, 100%. And you are now my very first guest, which is awesome.
Yeah, basically, I just rugby tackled you when you said it and have been on at you since. So I'm glad I could help. But yeah, honestly, I just well, I love what you do, and you know the work you do in this space. So to incorporate that, and what a better TV show to use as an example, because yeah, which we'll get into, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
great combination.
Do you know how many times you've rewatched the series? Can you count on how many times you've seen it?
I don't think I can. I think I genuinely get to the end and then just restart it. And the other thing is, so I'm actually watching it at the moment by myself, as I always do, but also with my husband who's watching it for the first time. And so I don't know what series. I mean, he's just coming up to, um, you know, I don't want to say it in case there's spoilers, but I think he's coming up to a big wedding in the
Oh
series.
yeah. Oh,
And
wedding.
I know, and I'm probably further behind than that, watching it by myself, and it works because you can just dip in and out. Each episode stands on its own so brilliantly. You don't need to go and watch it. So chronologically it just works, it's just brilliant. But I just don't think I could say, and I'm sure there are people out there who've watched it a million more times than I have, and there's always that moment where somebody quotes from The Office and you're like, yeah, yeah, you. What about you? How many times have you watched it?
I genuinely can't count. I think I started watching it, was it like 2018, 2017 maybe? And yeah, I binged watched it and then I was like, oh, I'm really sad it's over. And I was like, I wonder if I can just start again. And I did. And then I just haven't stopped doing that. So every time I get to that final episode, I literally just go back like you do and watch the very
Yeah.
first episode from the beginning.
I don't know about you, but I always put it on in the background as well when I'm doing
Yes.
stuff, which is probably how I most often watch it. So the good thing about that is every time you rewatch it, you see something new or you hear something new, because the last time you were watching it, you're probably hanging out your washing and ran to get something from the washing machine.
Mm.
So yeah, that's the other thing I love about it. And they're so short, right? They're what, 20, 25 minutes. So
Yeah, but I
um,
can easily watch like 7 in a row.
yeah, very, very easy to binge watch.
So let's talk about the episode that we're going to be
Yes.
talking about, which is the merger episode, which is a really interesting one because we've got Scranton, which is where the main kind of bulk of the US office show is recorded. It's based on the Scranton office with Michael Scott as the kind of regional manager. And through all the changes that go through in Dunder Mifflin, they start to merge with Stamford, the Stamford branch. And there's quite a few instances throughout this episode. So as these two branches are merging, Michael Scott, who, if you've seen the show, is quite a challenging, he's quite a funny but also a difficult character in terms of the ways that he thinks he's making the right decision. So he kind of unintentionally creates this kind of them and us vibe. He's doing his best to try and merge the two groups together in one kind of identity, but actually I think he kind of ostracizes the groups from one another, and it kind of I guess makes the situation worse, that they end up hating each other so much more. So I think we're going to just quickly watch a little clip from this episode, and we'll have this shown for everybody as well, so you can watch it with us, and then we'll dive into what we think.
The official merger day, all family welcome breakfast. Come on in.
Hey, champagne.
No, guests only.
It's not salmon.
No, for the guests it is. For you, consider it cow meat. Strictly taboo.
I eat beef.
Well, then consider it poison beef. It's no touchy.
The beef is poison?
No, it's not beef. Just sit down, please. Welcome. Help yourself.
I might want these orientation materials.
Yeah. So as we saw from that clip, Michael Scott, so the couple of the characters that come in that want to help themselves to the champagne and to the beef and to all the kind of treats that are on the table aren't able to, and they're the part of the Scranton office, and who is allowed to touch the treats and eat the breakfast is the Stamford employees. Sharn, I'd love to get your perspective on your initial reactions of what Michael is up to.
Well, I personally love the ongoing relationship Michael has with Kelly. The fact that he's like, think of it as beef. And then, of course, Kevin, the most lovable buffoon, comes in and he's asking if the beef is poison. So, yeah, do you know what? Watching this, it reminded me, I don't know why. Well, I do know why, but it reminded me of when you go to renew your phone contract and you've seen a really good phone deal and they tell you that that's just for new customers, and you're like, I'm over here, I've been with you for 10 years, why don't I get the same deal? And I think Michael, he always has the best intentions, right? Always, like, what a lovely gesture he wants to put on this lovely breakfast. He wants to welcome everybody, but he completely alienates the people that are already working there. So, but invites them into the breakfast room, right? So invites them to come in and stand there and essentially watch everyone else eat, and sort of publicly tells them off for even going near the food. And that must be so difficult for the Stamford lot, who are already feeling quite confused with this Michael Scott character. So you do feel for Michael, because he always has the best intentions, but he just executes them really badly. And I think in the build up to this scene as well, you know, he gives them the goodie bags, he's got everybody's name tags and everything. And I think that's brilliant, because he really wants to make the effort, but it needs to go beyond just sort of a breakfast, a name tag. There's no conversation, there's no inclusion here for both of the teams, and that's where everything falls apart. So, you know, the breakfast, the goodie bag, the name tags, great ideas, but that's all he's kind of thought about. He's not thought about anything beyond that. Like, how is it going to work beyond that? How am I going to get these two groups together? And that's what that's where he falls short, unfortunately, as he often does.
He does often fall short. It's quite, yeah, some people that I've spoken to about the show that watch it, they're like cringing at Michael Scott because they're like, I just can't believe it. And I'm like, I feel like this happens in workplaces, maybe not to the same degree, because obviously this is for comedic effect, but in terms of mergers, you do get managers that almost maybe focus on one group over another and actually work against the very aspect of what they're intending to do, which is to bring together those two groups. So reflecting on what, like, the actions that Michael took, where he had the goodie bags for Stamford, which I think were just filled with like pencils.
Yeah,
There wasn't like anything amazing in there, but the gesture is still there. And then obviously creating this breakfast. Do you think it's a case of he could have had goodie bags for the Scranton employees and got them the breakfast themselves, or is his approach just completely kind of missing the mark, and maybe there should have been a different approach that he could have taken?
I think Yeah, who doesn't love a goodie bag? We always give our new starters goodie bags, and we love it. We want them to shout about that. But when it's that missed the mark, who needs a bag of pencils? When you're sat at your computer all day. So I think that element of it is, but whilst alienating the rest of the group, and I think that missed the mark. It's a nice idea, but again, poorly executed. What could he have done? He could have involved both of the groups, had a conversation with both the existing and the new team to, I don't know, perhaps buddy them up. How good would that be? So you haven't got this divide. To create, if I was Michael, which, now would be a good time actually to bring out my world's best boss mug.
Oh my goodness, I forgot the icebreaker question.
It's been sat there waiting. This was actually given to me by my people coordinator who relocated earlier this year and knows how obsessed I am with Michael Scott.
Oh, I love that. I need one of those mugs. Obviously, you have the world's best mug, boss mug. If you were to have a world's best something mug, what would yours say? Barring this one that you actually have, which says world's best boss.
Yeah. Do you know what? I was struggling with this, but then something happened this morning and I realized that's what I should be. And it's not glamorous and it's not cool. I would be the world's best shameless internet detective.
Please elaborate.
So it's just used for pure, I don't want to say gossip, pure drama. It's when when you're sort of, on Instagram. I don't really use a lot of social media, but I use Instagram. And when you're scrolling through Instagram and you notice that somebody who, I don't know, was in a long-term relationship or was married or used to live somewhere, and suddenly they're not posting pictures with that person anymore, I go in and I'm like, when did they stop? When did this breakup happen? And I just want to know. I just want to get to the detail, and I'm pretty good at figuring that out. So I've managed to suss out a lot of breakup. Like I always think, who is that person that's saying, "Oh, Ariana Grande lost 50,000 followers after her, misdemeanor"? I'm like, I would probably be good at that job because I would be able to find out what they did. So yeah. Shameless internet detective. It's not a good one, Sarah, but it's it's who I am.
I feel like those skills are useful, and I feel like a lot of people probably would need that in their lives for various things. Obviously, most of the time it is looking up people who have broken up with people, or like someone's dating somebody and like, is this, because there's like so much that goes on in the dating world. It's like, who is this person and how do I find out if they're legit or not? And everyone needs an internet detective in their life. It's very much needed for protection.
There you go. Now you know who to come to if you want to find out if somebody's broken up. Me.
Oh my goodness, I hadn't even thought about it. I'll have to come back to you.
Yeah.
I'll have to come back to you at the end. I never thought someone would ask me that question. I was like, oh, obviously being a podcast host, you ask all the questions. You don't have to answer any, but now the pressure's on.
That's when you speak to somebody who's in a people role, you see.
Ask the questions back, get to know you.
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah, talking about the people role, one of the biggest clips that happens is there's a part where Michael Scott put all the Stamford employees on chairs on top of tables, and then you've got all the Scranton employees sat on the floor, and he's like, this is to demonstrate that we're all equal. And one of the Scranton employees is like, surely we should all be sat at the same level if that's what you're trying to insinuate. And there's a clip where Martin, one of the characters from the Stamford office, walks in and is quite large. So in terms of getting up on the table and sitting on the chair, it's not going to be a pretty easy thing for him to do. And Michael's like, we'll help you get up there. And obviously this is just layered on all the other things that's happened in terms of Michael Scott's shortcomings with just making the Stamford employees feel really at odds with him as a manager and him as someone to kind of support them in this new office. And obviously subsequently Martin's like, look, I can't do this anymore. I quit.
I have to quit.
And then you just see Michael just like, he does have a tendency to act like a child, like throwing his toys out of the pram, and he just has this knee-jerk reaction. He's like, "You can't do that," and then he essentially says, "You're fired." And it's just this whole like spiral of nonsense that happens as a result of what's gone on in this particular scene. I'd love to just kind of open it up with that particular scene and get your perspective on it, Sean, because yeah, it's a tricky one, that one.
Yeah, I mean, nonsense is the best word to describe that, because it is, it, and Michael is the first person to point out um, somebody's appearance, physical,
Mm,
he's the first person to make a joke. So the fact that he is so desperate to make this thing work, whatever this thing is that he's trying to do, by elevating the Stamford branch to make them all seem equal, which is bonkers. The fact that he responds to him in a way where he doesn't make note of his physical appearance, which is something that is so often the case with Michael. He's the first to make quips about how somebody looks, and he's so desperate to make it work. And he's there trying to help him, force him up onto the table. I say help, force him up onto the table whilst this employee is desperately trying to get away from him. And I think he's Michael's just not listening. And for me, it's about that feedback piece. We've all had managers who want to make things work, want to do things a certain way, and don't think about the impact it's going to have to employees as a whole or individuals. And they just, it's that kind of definition of insanity, is where you keep doing the same thing. So he's so desperate to make it work that he's not willing to listen to why it doesn't make sense. Shouldn't we all be on the same level? Why is it possible? How are they going to get this pretty large man up on the table? But he keeps trying. There's perseverance there, because his way is the way to do it. And I think for me, it's about feedback. It's about listening to your employees. It's about listening to what their opinions are, how they think you can make something work. And yeah, I think especially in the workplace today, I'm hearing a lot of people talk, people who are in a workplace that they love, and I speak as one of those people, is where the senior management are the first to admit when they haven't done something right, or the first to listen to feedback, because they talk about hiring people who are experts in their field, and then you've got the other side where you've got a CEO, a CTO, or whoever it might be, and hire all this incredible talent, yet just refuse to listen to them when they go, maybe this piece of tech isn't right, or maybe we shouldn't be hiring for this role, or maybe the market needs this direction, or this piece of work. So it's about trusting and listening to the employees, and not just thinking that your way is the best way. And I think, that's where he goes wrong. Yet again, the intention is there. He wants to try and demonstrate that he's been, the world's best boss, but really he's just not listening. He's not listening to the noise and the chaos that's going on around him. And then when the reaction is, okay, well, I quit. His response is, well, you're fired. And that's another example of like, why do people leave? Why do great employees leave the workplace or leave a business? And it's because they're not being listened to. Their ideas are not being heard, whether that's because of the way in which the company should not necessarily run, but the way the team should work. And when managers don't listen to their team, that's why people leave. And his response is to continue. Okay, well, bye. I'm going to continue with what it is I'm trying to do here, which is badly integrate you. The funny thing is, it's called the integration celebration, and there's no integration going on, which is, I'm sure, ironically named.
It's interesting because there's that saying, isn't there, where it's like people don't leave organizations, they leave bad managers. And that's very much what happens in this particular scenario, that people are pushed past their breaking point, feedback isn't listened to, so their only other option is to leave. And I think if you have a high turnover in the organization, and that high turnover is particularly like so many wonderful people that brought so much greatness to the organization, it's usually an indication that something as in terms of the culture and the management that isn't responding very well. Because I guess if managers were more receptive to feedback, if in that scenario Michael Scott was receptive to hearing what was, you know, being said by Stamford and Scranton, maybe the situation might have unfolded differently. You know, maybe that integration celebration could have been an open, collaborative discussion of what are the issues here and what could we do to make this a more seamless, collaborative kind of merge of two companies, a bit more comfortable. Yeah, made it more of that integration celebration for sure.
Yeah, rather than that physical level of difference and you can eat this food versus you can't eat this food. I actually like years and years and years ago when I worked in retail, as probably everyone did at some point in their life. If you didn't, you're the lucky ones. But I remember we had two stores on, you know, Kings Road in Chelsea, and they closed one of the stores down and merged that team over, and the manager that was in that store was more senior than me and I was the manager in the other store, so she kind of, you know, very much like a Jim and Michael situation later on in the series where they both become co-managers. And there was this real divide. There was this real, you know, the manager from the other store was so clearly dishing out favoritism to this other store. It was so unbearable to watch. And you know, as someone who had been told that they had a manager above them, it was so painful to watch and so painful to experience. And yeah, I think I've blocked that a big chunk of that time out of my life because it was so ridiculous. But that is how to do it badly, to just to not integrate people and to continue to see them as two different groups rather than, you know, one group in total.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned about the roles and stuff, that in terms of that merger, because even in this particular episode, we see Dwight Schrute, one of the Scranton employees, kind of asking Michael to clarify who's more senior out of him and Andy Bernard, who's come over from Stamford, because they've got very similar sounding titles. And I think Michael's like, it doesn't matter, it's irrelevant. Like, he just kind of is a throwaway comment, which just leaves both Dwight and Andy in this, like, I mean, they're butting heads. I don't feel like they ever see eye to eye. I mean, later on in the series, if they share a woman,
Yeah.
they'll ever be happy with one another. But yeah, I think that's a huge thing in terms of mergers. You know, you just get all these different titles that worked within those respective organizations come together, and suddenly there's this confusion, there's this lack of clarity. Where's the hierarchy? Who reports to who? And that can be really unsettling and really upsetting. And depending on how the individual sees that role, they might perceive themselves as more senior than the other person, but the flip could be true for the other person who sees them more senior. And then you get all this kind of clashing of decision making, and the culture, the people pay the price for that kind of mix up, don't they?
Yeah, I think he makes some comment like, it doesn't matter, it's irrelevant, it just matters what you're paid, which is just, you know, bringing up pay again. You know, and I know it's very tongue-in-cheek, but moving that into the modern day workplace, because you forget, right, how old is The Office? How that was season 3, that episode.
That's
so
quite early on, yeah.
yeah, that was. But in the modern day, you know, so the I work in a tech company, and different titles mean different things, very much like Dwight and Andy, means different things depending on the organization you've come from. So a lead engineer in one place means completely something completely different in comparison to a bigger or a smaller company. And that would never work if we just brought people into our workplace and just assumed that they were going to bring in the responsibilities or the level of responsibilities they had from their other roles. So you need to make sure a conversation's had with the new employee and the existing team as well, so they can understand, yeah, we're bringing in somebody who has lead in their title, and yes, I know you've got lead in your title, but this is how it's going to work, so it's harmonious. And you have to bring new and existing employees into the conversation if you've got any chance of making things work, particularly for us in a remote world, because you don't get that interaction Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And again, it's like we discussed, that's where he goes wrong. He doesn't bring the two people together. I love that he says off camera, to the camera, where he's like, Andy Bernard, that guy is a stand-up fella. And it's because he sees himself in him, right, when they're in at the beginning with the goodie bags. And you realize how alike they are. And that's why he loves him so much. So having that comment to the camera is brilliant, because obviously he ends up slowly hating him, which most of us do. I'm sorry, I know that's probably another topic, but Andy Bernard isn't. Oh yeah,
He's
not a
there.
fan.
No, I think, do you know what? I think the similarity between Michael Scott and Andy Bernard is that they're both deeply insecure characters, and they seek that approval from those around them. Whereas I think Michael Scott seeks that approval from everybody in the office, and he tries to do things that are quite misses the mark. Andy Bernard is just focused on getting Michael Scott's approval. And I think that comes from the dad complex of you find out later on that Andy has quite a tricky relationship with his own family. So he almost looks to Michael Scott as like that father figure and wants that approval and wants him to look at him in a particular way. It's really interesting. And that kind of deep insecurity plays off onto the other characters, and they just can't see any connection, and they struggle because it doesn't come across as sincere, right? There's no genuine interaction there because it is a self-serving effort to just kind of build their own ego and protect their own self-esteem.
Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned that about Andy's dad, because Michael keeps talking in this episode about being a family. Like, we're a family, and welcome to the family, and our families are merging. Right? Families are so dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So it's like and we've all again worked somewhere where somebody said, it's like a family, and that's not always. It's a red flag, because you then start thinking, especially in today's days, go, right, is that a good thing? Do I want my workplace to be my family? But for Michael, it's everything he craves. He just and like you say, Andy just wants Michael's approval, as does Dwight. But Dwight will, at the drop of a hat, think about himself. Like we've seen episodes where he's backstabbed Michael and ended up doing his laundry for years because he goes around him, or he goes over his head, or whatever. And so there's so many times in this episode where Michael will talk about family, and he thinks it's a good thing. And like you say, that's a red flag because of how dysfunctional families can be.
Yeah, the only person that's not in Michael Scott's family is Toby. So for those that don't know, Toby is the HR guy within the Scranton office, and Toby gets a hard time of it from Michael Scott. Do you find that in like people roles and with like HR teams that there is like a divide and conflict or butting of heads between senior management and those departments?
Do you know what? I think the best thing my CEO did when he appointed me was making me head of people and not head of HR, because and I'm always the first to go, I'm people, I'm not HR, because I think watching this series, when I moved into the head of people role, whereas before I was very much talent acquisition and talent management, you really feel for Toby, because he's just trying to do the right thing all the time and do it properly, unlike Michael, who's trying to do the right thing and does it poorly. So I do feel more and more for Toby as I went into this role. But I think when you're in an HR function, you're seen as an addition of the team, whereas I found in a people role, you are the team. You're especially, I joined the business 3 years ago now. I'm coming up to 3 years, and was the first non-exec member of the team. And now we've grown to around about 25. And in a people role, you're building the culture, you're building out what the values are, how this company is going to live and breathe. Whereas HR typically is the go-to when you've got a problem. And don't get me wrong, people still come to me when they've got a problem or when something isn't quite right. But the people element makes it more human, which is interesting, because HR, literally the first word is human. HR are the backbone. They get stuff done and they keep things ticking over. But because it, people take the piss out of HR so much. But the more and more I'm seeing these roles that are coming up, which are head of people and culture, head of development, or sort of people focused roles rather than HR. And I think a huge number of businesses are making that shift now. And I imagine a lot of people are looking to receive an accreditation or an award that makes them an employer of choice. And they're probably looking at that HR people function to say, how can we make this a great place to work? How can we make this a place, what do people care about? And how can we make it more about the people and the employees? So yeah, poor HR, poor Toby, he gets such a bad rep and he's just trying to help. And he loves Pam. He doesn't love him back.
So much love there for Pam. And actually, what's interesting about the murder episode is, and Toby's quite softly spoken. I think he kind of kind of recoils into himself because of Michael's behaviors. But everybody from the Stamford office can't help but praise Toby for everything that he's helped. He's like, Toby's been nothing but supportive and friendly and really informative because, he's given them the clarity of, here's what you're supposed to do, this is what's going on. Whereas Michael Scott's like just scrambling around and putting people on tables. Toby's actually giving the information that people want in those times of big change. Like a merger is really unsettling. It's like, am I going to be here? Am I not going to be here? Who are these new people? Am I going to create friendships? Am I not? What's the culture? Who's the manager? And if you've got this really kind of problematic manager, you probably do look to HR or the people team to kind of give you that clarity and support that is needed in those times.
Oh my God, absolutely. And there's actually a moment, I think it's just before Michael shows that video of him and Dwight.
Yeah.
Which is so hilarious. Where Toby comes in with his binder and we've got to do this orientation. And Michael's like, oh no, I don't want to do this orientation. And that is the role of HR, isn't it? Because giving people this information, and Michael just wants to be fun. And that's why managers should just leave onboarding to the professionals, because one of the things I always do is at the end of the first week, at the end of the first 2 weeks, at the end of the first month, is sitting down with that new employee and asking them, whether it's through a merger or whether it's a new hire, how was your onboarding? Did we give you too much to do? Did we not give you enough? What do you need to know? And those check-in points, and they're very informal, I call them a coffee chat, but they're so important, because if you fail to address those, and I'm not looking at it from a, you are in this role, it's more from a holistic perspective. So from a people perspective, how have you settled in? How are you finding it? Do you physically have everything you need, all the tools you need to do your job? And sometimes managers fail to do that because they just want to get so much off their plate onto their new employees' plate that they forget to do those check-ins. And that's where HR and people, and that's why all of these new Stamford lot are praising Toby. I'm really tooting the HR people on here, but that's why people that's why Toby gets so much praise, because he is that calm, steady voice of reason and support, unlike Michael, who just wants to shout out about how great the company is and look at all these fantastic things we're doing. It's like, yeah, great, but we just want that stability. Toby appreciation moment right here.
He gets a hard time, but I did appreciate him in that episode. I think he was, like, as you say, the voice of reason for the Stamford lot. And the Stamford lot don't stay for very much longer. It's only Andy that sticks around afterwards.
Yeah, that's true. They all move on quite quickly, don't they? And
Karen, she leaves.
Karen,
but I think that's very unrelated to Michael Scott.
yeah, that's probably more Jim driven. But yeah, Andy's the only one who sticks around, and that probably says a lot about Andy, because of this family that Michael is forcing. Weirdly, they do kind of come together, because they come together because they're discussing Michael, and oh my god, right at the end, and Michael thinks that's because of me. He's like, yeah, it is because of you, but not because you've done
Because
it.
you're the problem.
You're the problem. But yeah, they do come together and they do have this moment, which is really nice to see, because the whole of the build up has been this divide during this integration ceremony where it's like us and them, you and them, new and old. And so they finally come together despite all of that, which says a lot about them. And Michael's there just all smug, like, look at me. But we love him because he's the world's best boss.
Despite all his shortcomings, there is a soft spot in my heart for Michael Scott, that's for sure.
Yeah, he but imagine working with him.
Oh no, I couldn't work with him. No. I fired myself in like a couple of seconds.
Yeah, you would. You'd bring a legal lawsuit action, whatever happens in the US. I feel like their employment laws are very different to ours, but yeah, you'd get out of there sharpish. But I think everyone has been there for so long, and even Ryan changes so much, from being semi-keen temp to this animal. And I don't know, I wonder how much Michael Scott has got to do with that. Everyone is just sort of tolerating it, and everyone is in this sort of almost either very old, so they're not going anywhere, like Creed, who knows what he does. He still doesn't know. And the likes of Stanley and Phyllis, and then you've got Jim and Pam, who probably there for one another, which they're not leaving because they just want to be together. And that's why Michael thinks it's his family, because he's brought these people together. But you sort of think that's not the reason why they're not leaving. It's just they're a bit stuck there.
Yeah. It's a shame, isn't it? But we love them being stuck there because then we get to keep watching them on our screens. Oh, well, this has been just such a great conversation. I've enjoyed every minute of it, and I can't wait for us to get together again to talk about
Yes, please.
This one is season 3, episode
8, I think.
Episode 8, yeah. So even then, that's quite there's a lot behind that kind of gives some light to who Michael Scott really is in the office itself. So no doubt we'll be back again with Sharn to talk about.
Please.
Again.
I'll happily be a regular feature if you'll have me back.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. It's been really great, and I think when you first mentioned it, I was so excited to talk about The Office because I love it. And actually, I realised there's so much to dissect. And so much to share about what we do in the workplace, in our roles as well. All comes back to Michael Scott. So thank you. Thanks for having me on. Invite me back, please.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Sharn, and thank you to all our listeners. We would love to hear any feedback you have, and if there's a particular episode you want us to dissect and talk about, then do let us know by getting in touch with us via email, Instagram, or LinkedIn. We'll have all the links in the description of the podcast. But can't wait to see you in the next episode. Take care for now, and bye-bye.